says Intro to Humanitarian Journalism. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is the first session of series of 5 sessions that we're going to have in the next 5 weeks. So in the 5 weeks, we're going to cover the following topics. We're going to start with humanitarian journalism foundations, and then we'll go to storytelling and multimedia journalism. Um, I wanted to bring in multimedia here because right now it's the digital age. We have people using social media and using film and using books, everything to tell stories. So I wanted to include that in here. Ethics, safety, and youth media responsibility. As youth, what's our responsibility when telling stories of others and telling the stories of ourselves? Um, the fourth session will be on reporting, research, and interview skills. So that's a very important section of doing humanitarian research and filming stories all together. How do we tell fair stories? How do we make sure that the people we interview, we have a good work ethics around that? And then the last session will be about publishing, impact, and youth leadership. So I wanted to ask all of you guys a question to get started. What do you think about when you hear humanitarian journalism? I won't call on people this time, but if you can open your mic and just say something that pops into your mind, that would be great.
I do think that is about uh, it's a news that which is report more the stuff that care for people instead of government.
All right, thank you, Amelia. Anyone else? I'd love to hear from everyone.
So on the HMPW, which like last few months, I worked on actually on news journalism, and the fun fact I noticed was like a lot of humanitarian journalism are focusing on large scale, such as like crisis or wars or something like that, like
Mm.
on large scale. Rather like because my part was on news journalism, so there's a few reports on them. Like no one is talking about like people, students in community. No one is like talking about those stuff. Only focusing on the word perspective. So I think that's a fun, not a fun fact, but interesting point.
That's a great point to include as well. And I think that's why we're doing this stuff right now among us so that we can tell the story of youth in the future as well in HMPW. Thank you, Fausto.
Yeah, so I agree with Foster's idea. I mean, like like kind of like one of the interesting points, just like to, report that what kind of like what's going on like in our world right now, like such as like some conflicts or some like natural disaster. Does it count? I think, and probably like humanitarian journalism just like give a kind of like to give us space to us to kind of like express the voices of some uh communities that includes in some like in the events that like that is reporting right now. And yeah, just like to share some like their idea, and always like the reporter like always like use kind of like a like an empathy way to show like the value and yeah, I think like just like the whole event and the value of like what's going on. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah, empathy is a big part of humanitarian journalism because without empathy, how are we going to tell stories? Because stories is the way that we bring empathy, that empathy to others as well. So thank you, Jenny.
I agree with what Jenny and Foster said. I think like humanitarian journalism just like a form of reporting that focuses on like human suffering or dignity or some for example like social justice, I think is aiming I think its purpose just like raise more awareness and like to promote how positive change we can make by this kind of reporting way. Also, I think can this kind of reporting method can also give a voice to like marginalized vulnerable groups like uh yeah, and also can carries more ethical and moral perspective to encourage public um empathy as well. Yeah.
Totally. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I hear some common themes in all of the things that you guys said. So about disaster relief, about social justice, about humanitarianism, bringing empathy to people and bringing a voice to marginalized communities, bringing a voice to the vulnerable communities, and telling a story on them, for them, and including them in conversations. So all of those things that we mentioned are what humanitarian journalism is. So next, I'm going to share like a formal definition for you. But again, be mindful that everything, especially humanitarian journalism, is so flexible and is so comprehensive that there's no one definition that people can decide on, even in the professional world. Um, so actually, when I was researching about humanitarian journalism, I found that the term humanitarian is actually debated upon because some people argue that crisis, it has to be an urgent problem, like an urgent emergency in order to count as a humanitarian issue. But others believe that it is their responsibility to address the root cause of human suffering. So that would include poverty, inequality, which can increase the vulnerability to crises. So they're also looking at the root cause of humanitarian crises and counting those as humanitarian as well. Um, and also that some people, humanitarian journalists, they want to appear as neutral and apolitical as they can all the time. But be mindful that that isn't necessarily true or that isn't necessarily possible all the time. And sometimes that can be counterproductive as well if we're trying to avoid topics all the time. Um, so I found one definition from a credible source. They named it as production and distribution of factual accounts of crises, events, and issues related to human welfare. Um, what do you guys think the word or the term human welfare means in general? I can share my perspective first. So when I think about human welfare, it includes everything for people in order for people to have a good life or like a satisfactory life that they want. So for me, that includes things like access to clean water, access to food, good food, access to a good education, electricity, all of that. Um, so again, when we say human welfare, that is very subjective. It is everyone has their own definition of it. So again, going back to why the term humanitarian journalism, it doesn't have a formal definition. Um, when we talk about journalism specifically, there are two ways that people do reporting. The first way is what we call like a traditional reporting. So the traditional reporting, they aim to inform the public in order for them to make decisions on their own. So on the other hand, advocacy reporting is when we're trying to persuade the audience and incite action or policy change. So there's a fundamental difference between the two. One, traditional reporting try to stay apolitical, as neutral as possible, and advocacy reporting is endorsing a viewpoint most of the time. So they have different objectives. The traditional journalists, they strive for neutrality, and they try to remove the personal bias in it. On the other hand, advocacy reporting, they often argue that neutrality is basically unachievable or it is impossible to achieve. So they instead try to be transparent about their bias when they're representing rigorous and evidence-based but targeted narratives. So it is not saying that when we say advocacy reporting, it is not credible. It is still credible. But the thing about advocacy is that you're being transparent about the bias you have. You're championing an issue that you deeply matter, that deeply matters to you and you care about. But then you're also using things like evidence and interviews to help support your point. Does that all make sense to us so far? Okay, great. Um, so critics of advocacy journalism, they have argued that it shouldn't be considered an act of journalism at all because the traditional definition of what journalism is that it stays neutral and it cannot have an agenda, which is different from what advocacy reporting suggests. So sometimes people argue that if we say advocacy reporting is considered journalism, then what is the distinction between journalism and propaganda or marketing material? So that's what some critics say. But on the other hand, supporters of advocacy reporting, they maintain that traditional journalism, it has never been objective or as neutral as people believe it to be, because if practitioners are transparent about their motives and staying factual in their work, it can still advocacy reporting can still be a type of journalism. So I want to stop here and ask you guys whether you think advocacy reporting is considered a type of journalism and where you will see active advocacy journalism.
That I think advocacy reporting is kind included in journalism because it actually can help the audience to connect with the news that which report the human welfare, but it also allows people to have their own opinion about like a viewpoint about some moral and ethical stuff.
Thank you, Amelia. Anyone else? If not, that's okay. We'll keep going. I want to make sure that it's not just me talking all the time because I know from lectures myself that I tend to get bored when people like talk at me. So if you guys have any comments or any questions, feel free to jump right in because the main point of this is having a discussion so that we can all learn together. Okay, and going more into journalism versus advocacy. So, a question I want to start with is, do you guys think impact is the goal of journalism, or is it doing journalism first and see where that gets you with the impact? There's no wrong answers here. Okay, I'm going to call on someone. Foster?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like the journalism is aiming for telling the truth to the to the whole world, I would say. Like just like a breakdown of whatever is going on here, what's going on everywhere in the world. Like I would say it's a way of like retelling a story. And for advocacy, I feel like it's using emotional languages. It's use like evoking like people's emotion like in their mind to trying to trying to get everyone like involved in the like human affair or whatever you call it. It's just like calling people to get here and do better for the world. I would say that.
I definitely agree with that. And that kind of brings up the topic of storytelling, right? Because when we talk about advocacy, we try to engage others into the conversation. We try to help people realize why the thing that you're talking about is important and is significant for other people to join in and act upon it as well. Um, and a lot of the time, I feel like the line between the two can be blurred, especially for humanitarian journalism. It kind of blends advocacy and journalism together. So with that as a background context, what actually distinguishes journalism with advocacy? Because at first glance, they can be very similar. Both of them you're caring about issues, and both of them you want change, and both of them tell stories as well. So, in short, when I was doing research, I found that advocates they start with an answer. So they know about the change that they want to see before they write some piece about it. So they begin with the belief that, hey, this is the problem that we need to address, and this is what needs to happen in order to bring that change. And then they use different storytelling ideas, different data or campaigns, movements in order to get them that change that they want. And on the other hand, journalism and journalists, they want to start with a question first. So they do like a series of investigations and they listen to people and they gather evidence before they um, assume that they know the full story and they try to bring impact into it. So, and during that entire process, they begin to understand what is the impact that this story will have and what is the problem and what kind of impact they want their work to have. So, it's kind of like they're trying to do the same thing, but in the reverse order. Um, and I think the difference here it makes a lot of difference because advocates they seek impact before based on what they believe the society needs, and journalism they seek truth first and let that truth guide any impact. Um, and I feel like what journalism and humanitarian journalism needs to do is that we, of course, need to gather evidence and we also need to talk to as many people as possible inside the community that we're engaging with in order to tell the story and understand what impact do they hope the work like will have. So instead of only talking about impact from our perspective, I feel like we should understand impact from other people's perspective as well and try to make like a collective action on it. Um, so a question again is where does humanitarian journalism fall under the spectrum of journalism and advocacy? Um, and I found one ProPublica paper, and they put it as embrace impact as a goal, but seek it using only journalistic means. So to close it off, humanitarian journalism is in between journalism and advocacy because we care about impact, but we also want to earn that impact from truth and rigor and accountability. But here we definitely want to start with questions and hard questions before we start, like instead of starting with an answer. Okay, so I wanted to go next into how we can ensure fair storytelling. Storytelling, like any other type of telling stories or media, it can be biased. And as human ourselves, there's no way that we completely get rid of bias. And even when we talk about AI right now, AI has bias as well, even though um, we consider it to be like a computer program that is supposed to be neutral and supposed to be subjective. But because it is people actually coding the AI actually end up absorbing our bias as well. So Again, that is to say that nothing is completely neutral or completely subjective. So that is why we need to be mindful when we're telling stories and when we're interviewing people, in order to make sure that we're telling a fair story and in order to tell a comprehensive story as well. I wanted to specifically talk about power, privilege, and representation in storytelling. So there are three golden rules that people usually agree on. First is show, don't tell system at work. You've probably heard about the show, don't tell in writing. We are doing English essays and we are doing like history essays, but this also applies to storytelling as well. And the second point is to provide context. The third is to uplift the voices of marginalized people. As we previously talked about when we started with the introduction question, right? How can we include the voices of marginalized people in the discussion and in the storytelling process? People about the topics that you want to learn about. So during interviews, I always ask the following questions. First, start with, is it okay with you that I record this for transcribing purposes? Especially if you think that you will go back to the audio or the video of your Zoom session to make sure that you understand the full picture. But it's always necessary that you get their consent. If you forgot to ask during the meeting itself, always do a follow-up thing after the meeting to get their formal like written consent as well. And always ask, is now a good time to share your story? And or if you connected them before, how long have you how have you been since we last connected? Like it's important to build that personal connection as well. So next, several questions. Would you feel comfortable sharing now? Have you shared your story before? And also, again, with building a personal connection, if you're not sure about how to pronounce this person's name, definitely ask them, is this how you pronounce your name? Make sure that you get the spelling right. I personally had several times where my name was spelled wrong. My name is Yuxuan, Yuxuan, and several times during awards or during interviews, people spelled my name wrong and skipped a U or a somewhere. So definitely ask them about the pronunciation and about the spelling of their name. And lastly, ask about gender identity and pronouns. So all of this is to say that you should be respectful and you should try to establish a connection with them before you actually get into the interview. And several tips I have is before you get into the interview, tell them about the scope of the work, whether there's compensation or not, and a timeline for involvement. And always ask them, does that fit your goals? Does that fit your timeline to make sure that you're aligned? And always be forthcoming, transparent when conversations are on the record and off the record. When the interviewee, when the participant asks you to leave some information out, definitely leave it out. And when you are drafting your story and publishing the story, definitely send a draft of the story write-up before you publish it. And definitely be open to edits after a story has been published if the interviewing feel like uneasy about the story details. And after you publish it, follow up with a link to the written or recorded story. And always thank them for their time and their vulnerability when sharing the stories. Some of the things that we are asking may be uncomfortable for them to think about again or to share. So it is important to honor their work and honor the contributions. One last thing I have today is the do not harm principle. When we talk about humanitarian journalism, this is one of the most important principles. So it sounds pretty simple from the name because it's basically saying that our work should never make a situation worse for the people that we're interviewing. That's basically what the do not harm principle is. When we enter vulnerable populations and communities, whether it is people harmed by war or poverty or displacement or environmental injustice. Try to think about us not as the observers, but as someone who is making a real impact, because every question and our presence there and the stories we publish are going to have real consequences to the communities. So several questions I want to share with you guys to always keep in mind is who benefits from the story, who might be harmed by it, and are we telling the story with dignity, accuracy, and respect? So always keep these in mind instead of just thinking about like how can I tell a powerful story. Um, think about how we can tell a story responsibly, and believe it or not, the story might actually come out a lot better than that. If you're just thinking, about how can I make this impactful. So that is the last part I have, and I have a short